Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, Arrival at Hôtel Riviera. Hercule Poirot stepped ashore from the coastal steamer La Belle Marie as the first tendrils of dawn lightened the sky. A fine mist clung to the rolling sea below the cliff's edge, lending the Cornish coastline an ethereal charm. Poirot's neatly polished black shoes clicked on the gangway, each tap deliberate and precise. He favored order even in the smallest matters of appearance. Above him, gulls wheeled and cried, their calls softened by the morning haze. The Hôtel Riviera rose before him like a stately ship moored atop the crag. Its whitewashed walls gleamed faintly, trimmed with wrought-iron balconies festooned in hanging baskets of crimson geraniums and trailing ivy. The slate roof, dark and weathered, sloped steeply toward the turbulent Atlantic, a testament to the hotel's resilience against winter storms. A solitary palm tree by the entrance shivered in the sea breeze, its fronds whispering secrets in a language of rustling green. Poirot paused to admire the scene. He adjusted his grey bowler hat, straightened the immaculate folds of his charcoal greatcoat, and stroked his waxed moustaches, a ritual almost as sacred as the careful lacing of his gloves. He observed, with quiet satisfaction, that even in this modest seaside town, the Hôtel Riviera exuded the air of genteel refinement. As he made his way through the main doors, the smell of fresh linen and polished wood greeted him. A broad mahogany desk dominated the foyer, behind which stood Madame Aurelia Hawthorne herself, a briskly efficient woman in early 50s who possessed the bearing of a woman accustomed to both hospitality and discretion. Her hair, a silver crown pinned high on her head, framed a face that was at once warm and composed. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, stepping forward. Her fine French accent danced over the words. "You arrive at exactly the moment I had hoped." Poirot inclined his head with his customary elegance. "Madame Hawthorne, your invitation came with such urgency that I cleared my schedule immediately. Pray forgive any slight delay on my part. I encountered but a mere ripple of fog." Madame Hawthorne allowed herself a small laugh. "I spared no effort. Port Megan seldom sees fog so insistent as to delay guests." She offered him a gloved hand. "Welcome to the Hôtel Riviera. You will find your suite comfortable, though the view, She swept her arm toward the balcony. "The sea is something I could never tire of presenting to guests." Poirot's keen eyes noted the polished brass lion's head knocker on the heavy oak door to his suite, the intricate pattern of the oriental rug beneath his feet, and the small silver bell at the front desk, its clapper poised as though in silent readiness. "Madam, your establishment reflects impeccable taste," he observed. "Truly, a most felicitous setting." The proprietor led him toward a grand staircase carpeted in plush crimson. As they passed, Poirot could not help but notice the small cluster of guests assembled by the bay window on the ground floor. For figures stood in muted conversation, a tall, silver-haired gentleman in naval uniform, a young woman whose downcast eyes contrasted with her fine, pearlescent gown, a man with sharp American features and a notebook in hand, and, closest to the window's edge, a distinguished-looking gentleman in tweed, clutching a leather portfolio. Madame Hawthorne glanced at the group, her brow creasing for a fraction of a second. "Allow me to introduce the company," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "To your left is Captain Edward Talbot, recently retired from the Royal Navy, and, I fear, in some financial straits. Next to him, Miss Elise Hawthorne, my only child. She is ever so private but has an interest in poetry. The gentleman with the notebook is Mr. Franklin Hart, an American journalist of some repute, here on assignment, he tells me, to write an article on Cornish seaside life. And lastly, Sir Basil Langley, renowned poet and lecturer." She gave a small, rueful smile. "He is the very reason I summoned you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head once more, offering a brief yet polite bow in the direction of each attendee. Captain. Miss Mr. Sir Basil. I trust we shall meet properly in due course. Madame Hawthorn led him up the stairs, and as they ascended, her voice dropped to a confidential tone. You will have gathered that something is amiss. I cannot say more until you have settled. My reservations concern matters rather delicate, personal and, dare I say, urgent. Madam, Poirot replied, each word measured, my pleasure is to assist, whatever the gravity of the predicament. You have but to confide in me. She nodded and guided him to Suite 24, a spacious room overlooking the ocean. Dark oak panels gave the walls warmth, a chaise longue sat by a wide sash window, its cushions plump and inviting. A writing desk lay near the far wall, with a leather-bound journal open as though someone had just been writing. On the parquet floor stood a small table with a silver tea service, 2 cups waiting beside a porcelain plate of freshly cut lemon cake. Poirot removed his gloves, setting them carefully on the desk. He turned to Madame Hawthorn. Shall I freshen myself before dinner? The hostess hesitated. Dinner will be served in the dining salon at 8. But I must entreat you to join me in the library at 7:30. There, I shall explain in full. At 7:30, Poirot confirmed softly. I shall be there promptly. He looked out through the window at the slate-grey sea, where waves rose like tumbling brides of foam before collapsing back into the deep. A single fishing boat churned its way along the horizon, its red hull a bright smudge against the watery vastness. Madame Hawthorn departed with a curtsy, leaving Poirot to survey his surroundings. He cast his gaze deliberately across the room, the faint indentation in the velvet armchair where someone had been seated, the slight scuff on the polished floor beneath the desk, the absence of any personal items that might suggest the number of occupants in the hotel, the neatly folded bathrobe on its hook, cord still knotted, the soft glow of an oil lamp shaped like a swan. Poirot set to work at once, for the detection of crime, he believed, began with the observation of all that is quiet, subtle, and unseen. He approached the writing desk and ran his fingertips over the journal's cover. No lock. A pencil lay atop the page, its tip dulled by use. The page itself bore a few lines of verse, the handwriting elegant yet vigorous. He read, Beneath the vault of ocean's cry. A heart in silent anguish lies. He closed the journal gently. A fresh slice of lemon cake on the side table beckoned. Poirot sampled it with the utmost gravity, noting the fine crumb and the delicate tang, delicious, but irrelevant for the moment. His mind, always active, turned to Madame Hawthorn's parting words, urgent and delicate. Such adjectives suggested either scandal or danger, but which? A faint knock at the door broke his reverie. The chambermaid, a young woman in crisp uniform, entered with a decanter of port and 2 glasses. Poirot offered a gracious merci as she poured. She hesitated, then said in a low voice, Monsieur, would you like anything else? Madame Hawthorn was very keen you had port tonight. No, mademoiselle, this is most satisfactory, Poirot replied with a smile. He looked at her keenly. Tell me, have you observed anything unusual in the hotel these past days? Any tension amongst the guests? The chambermaid's large eyes widened slightly. Well, sir, some have arrived late. Others have departed early. Madame Hawthorn seemed uneasy before your arrival, but she would not say why. She glanced toward the door. Forgive me, I should not have pried. Poirot inclined his head. Not at all. Every detail, no matter how small, may prove useful. She curtsied and left, leaving Poirot once more to solitude and speculation. He finished his port, swirling the dregs in the glass. His moustaches twitched as he considered the scene, the hotel shaded by mist and whispers, a quartet of varied personalities, and an invitation suffused with urgency. Somewhere in those elegant corridors lay a secret, and possibly a scandal. Poirot's little grey cells quivered with anticipation. At exactly 7:30, he donned his hat and gloves, took his silver-headed walking stick, and descended toward the library. He passed the assembled guests in the corridor, each paused in silent greeting, and could not help but note the furtive glances exchanged. Outside, the wind had risen, and rain began to splatter gently against the windows, like a prelude to something more ominous. Stepping into the library's warm lamplight, Poirot found Madame Hawthorn awaiting him beside a crackling fire. The rest of the company sat around, Sir Basil Langley with his portfolio on his knee, Captain Talbot, naval posture rigid, Mr. Hart, all restless energy, and Elise, whose pale countenance contrasted with her mother's composed distress. Poirot closed the door behind him, his eyes bright. "Madam," he said softly, "you have my fullest attention." The rain tapped on the window panes, and the Hôtel Riviera seemed to hold its breath. The game, Poirot knew, was afoot. Chapter 2: The Poet's Demise. That evening, a wind-tossed sky threatened rain as the guests gathered in the Hôtel Riviera's dining salon. Candlelight flickered upon crisp linen and polished silver, while the scent of roast lamb and mint sauce mingled with the salt-laden breeze drifting through the open French windows. Madame Hawthorn presided at the head of the table, her expression composed though her eyes betrayed a hint of unrest. Beside her sat Elise, pale and quiet. Sir Basil Langley, the poet, was opposite, regaling Mr. Franklin Hart with tales of nightingale song and Shakespearean allusion. Captain Talbot listened with polite restraint, though his jaw still carried the shadow of resentment. Poirot observed each guest with the keen precision of a master conductor surveying an orchestra on the brink of performance. Every spoon raised, every sigh, every tremor of a hand might conceal a note of discord. Yet for the moment, the meal proceeded without incident, until dessert had barely begun. A sharp cry rang out from the corridor, halting conversation as abruptly as a dropped cake stand. The room grew deathly still. Inspector Bennet, travelling by special request of Scotland Yard, rose and motioned for silence. "Excuse me, madam," he said to Aurelia Hawthorn, voice steady but urgent, "there is trouble at the top of the house." Madame Hawthorn's face blanched. "My goodness, what has happened?" "Sir Basil's chambermaid found him," Bennet replied. "It seems he has been attacked." Sir Basil pushed back his chair in startled alarm. "Attacked?" he echoed, his cultured voice a falter for the first time that evening. Poirot, seated to Sir Basil's right, stood with unruffled calm. "Monsieur, if you will forgive my intrusion, I think it prudent we retire to the corridor and offer our assistance." He inclined his head to Inspector Bennet, whose satisfaction at the offer was plainly visible. Moments later, Poirot, Bennet, and the two chambermaids climbed the carpeted staircase in quick succession. Outside Suite 17, the door stood slightly ajar, the housekeeper's silver key glinting at the lock. From within came the low murmur of footsteps and the faint hiss of leaking gas, no, wind through the cracked window. Inspector Bennet pushed the door gently. Inside, the air was chilled by the open casement. A single oil lamp on the bedside table burned dimly, casting the room in shifting shadows. On the patterned carpet lay Sir Basil Langley, face upward, eyes half closed, chest still. A dark stain spread across his linen-fronted waistcoat, crimson bright against the soft fabric. A silver letter opener lay nearby, its blade flecked with fresh blood. Poirot approached with measured steps, his silk-lined greatcoat brushing the carpet. He bent, placing a hand lightly on Sir Basil's wrist. "No pulse," he announced softly. "He is gone." He rose and surveyed the surroundings with infinite care. The window stood wide, its panes rattling in the wind. Beneath it sat a low ottoman with tufted upholstery, the fabric bore the imprint of a slipper sole. On the windowsill rested a half-burnt sheet of paper, edges curled by heat. The bedside table drew Poirot's gaze next. Atop it, a leather-bound volume lay open to an inscription in flowing script, an anthology of Elizabethan verse, borrowed from the hotel library. The lamp's globe was smudged, as though someone had passed a hand across its surface. Inspector Bennet knelt to examine the floor. No sign of a struggle, he observed. No broken furniture or upturned chairs. He rose and turned to Poirot. "What do you make of it, monsieur?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. He approached the ottoman and examined the tufted top. With a gloved finger, he traced the faint outline of the slipper's tread. "Notice, Inspector," he said, "the slipper print is delicate, small, and the pattern is unusual, not a mass-produced sole. The culprit must have worn a slipper to gain entrance or to flee." He glanced toward the window. And yet, no telltale marks on the sill's outer ledge. The murderer left by another exit. Perhaps here, through the door. At first glance, you might think the window an obvious escape route, Bennet agreed. But you suggest otherwise. Precisely. Observe the mounting beneath the window, you see no scrape marks. If one had climbed out, one would disturb the paint or wood. Here, everything remains unperturbed. Poirot paused, then turned to the half-burnt paper. He picked it up with gloved care. The fragment bore 2 words, written in dark ink, "Forgive me." Madame Hawthorne and the other guests arrived in the corridor, faces drawn with shock. Elise's composure had dissolved, tears glistened on her lashes. Captain Talbot stood rigid, shoulders squared. Mr. Hart's hand shook as he held his notebook. Poirot met each gaze in turn. "Miss Amiss," he said quietly, "I regret to inform you that Sir Basil Langley is dead, foully slain. Scotland Yard will take formal charge, but for now I must ask you all to remain downstairs. Inspector Bennet will do the requisite questioning in due course." Bennet nodded, then paused. "Monsieur Poirot, I welcome your assistance. Please accompany me to Sir Basil's room while we secure the scene." As the door closed behind them, Elise staggered backward. Madame Hawthorne caught her arm. "My dear," she cried. Elise brushed her mother's hand away, her voice trembling. "He was kind to me, why would anyone do this?" Madame Hawthorne only shook her head, helpless. Mr. Hart stepped forward. I had an appointment with Sir Basil at 10 o'clock, he blurted. He wished to show me some unpublished verses." Captain Talbot frowned. "I, too, dined with him earlier. He pressed me for a loan settlement. Quite insistent." A hush fell, broken only by the distant toll of a church bell. Each guest seemed to glimpse suspicion reflected in the others' faces, as though a veil had been torn aside to reveal hidden motives. Poirot reappeared, brushing dust from his gloves. "Come, Miss Amiss," he invited. "Let us repair to the drawing-room. In time, all shall be revealed." Downstairs, the drawing-room's warming fire and plush chairs offered scant comfort. Inspector Bennet took Sir Basil's portfolio from a clerk and placed it on a low table, its contents spread like barnacles upon a tide-swept rock, poems, letters, and lecture notes. Poirot examined each in turn. He noted one page marked by a pencil sketch of the hotel's façade, corners dogged, another letter, the handwriting unmistakably Sir Basil's, spoke of betrayal but ended mid-sentence. "Inspector," Poirot said at last, "we must secure the manuscript pages. Someone desired these, clearly." He pointed to a folded sheet bearing the watermark of Hôtel Riviera's stationery. "This is not Sir Basil's handwriting. It reads as an apology, 'Forgive me for what I have done,' yet it is unsigned." Bennet frowned. "A confession of guilt? But unsigned." "Exactly. A red herring, perhaps." Poirot pressed his lips together, thinking. He picked up the anthology, now closed. And this volume was absent from the library's catalogue until 2 days ago. Who borrowed it? Madame Hawthorne cleared her throat. "I borrowed it for Elise. She admires Elizabethan sonnets. Elise's face went still. Yes. I wrote my own verses in it, but I returned it. Poirot's gaze remained on Elise, gentle but unyielding. And yet you did not return it to the shelf where it belonged. He opened the book to reveal the end paper, upon which a single fingerprint glimmered faintly in the lamp's glow. A curious fingerprint, though whether left by the poet or another, we shall see. Hart shifted. Monsieur Poirot, is it possible the poet took his own life? The half-burnt note, the absence of a weapon in his hand. Suicide, no, Poirot said firmly. A criminal's act leaves a trail, and this trail is complex. He closed his eyes briefly. We have a poem of betrayal, an unused door, a misleading note and a conspicuous absence of struggle. The murderer is cunning, and will have sought to point suspicion elsewhere. Madame Hawthorne clasped her hands. Whatever the motive, whoever did this is still among us. Poirot nodded. Indeed, madam. And it is my solemn duty to unmask them before tonight is out, or soon thereafter. Outside, a clap of thunder resonated, as though the storm itself applauded the beginning of Poirot's investigation. Each guest exchanged uneasy glances, and the drawing-room's gaslight flickered, casting long shadows that leapt like spectres on the walls. Poirot stood, straightening his cravat. Let us survey once more the scene of the crime at first light, he proposed. Until then, I entreat you all to reflect upon your evening's engagements, your movements, and any peculiarities you might have observed. No detail is too trifling. As the company dispersed, some to pacing, others to restless slumber, Poirot remained by the window, tracing the path of lightning across the heaving sea. His moustaches twitched in anticipation. The methodical game, he knew, had only just begun. The clues awaited, each concealed beneath layers of invention and misdirection. And Poirot, with impeccable order and unwavering resolve, would untangle them one by one. Chapter 3, Methodical Examination. Dawn broke in gentle silver streaks across the Atlantic as Poirot returned to Suite 17, Sir Basil Langley's chamber of death. The rain of the previous night had ceased, leaving the air crisp and fragrant with salt and damp earth. Madame Hawthorne, Inspector Bennet, and the two chambermaids gathered respectfully outside the door as Poirot took out his small key, assisted by Bennet, and entered once more. Inside, the room lay undisturbed since the discovery. The sleepy orange glow of a single lantern cast long, muted shadows across carpet and furniture. Poirot paused in the doorway, absorbing every detail in his mind's eye, before whispering to Bennet, Illinois fort suivre la méthode, mon ami. One step at a time. He moved toward the window first. The casement still stood open, shutters swung wide to let in the breeze, and the sill was unmarked by any recent disturbance. Carefully, Poirot ran a gloved finger along the ledge, no scrape, no fresh paint chips, nothing to suggest someone had climbed out. He straightened and faced the ottoman beneath the window. Observe, he said, the impression here. Bending low, he inspected the delicate tufting, noting a slender crescent of fabric compressed in the center. Whoever sat here wore slipper soles of a particular design, Poirot explained to Bennet. The pattern is not common, small daisies or stars, I should think. The murderer must have seated himself briefly before, or after, the act. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. Either to steady himself, or to watch from the shadows. Bennet made a brief note in his pocket-book, while the chambermaids hovered at the door, curious but silent. Poirot turned to the bedside table. The lamp, he observed again, was smudged on its globe, as though someone had wiped away fingerprints or markings. He set aside a small evidence bag for later fingerprint analysis. Next, he examined the half-burnt page on the floor. Its edges were crisp black, curling around the central text, but two words remained legible, forgive me. Poirot fitted the fragment into a small, square envelope. A message intended to mislead, sans signature, he remarked. Such a note might be left by anyone wishing to shift blame or to suggest guilt too neatly. He then surveyed the carpet. Around the doorframe, there were faint scuff marks, almost imperceptible, but visible to a careful eye. Poirot knelt and traced them with a gloved fingertip. See here, these scratches are horizontal, as though someone slid the blade along the wood when exiting. The door was either locked from inside or closed gently after the crime. Whoever did this chose to leave by the entrance, not the window. Moving to the writing desk where Sir Basil had scribbled his last notes, Poirot scrutinized the papers. Manuscript pages lay scattered, some covered in the poet's elegant script, others blank. On the topmost sheet, dense with annotations, was the plan of an upcoming lecture on Shakespeare. Poirot turned it over and discovered a faint watermark, Hotel Stationery. Decisively, he tucked the page into an evidence folder. He opened the desk's single drawer. Inside rested a small leather wallet, containing coins, calling cards, and a folded photograph of Sir Basil with an unidentified woman. Poirot studied the image through a magnifying glass. The woman wore dark glasses and a broad-brimmed sun hat, concealing her face. Curious, he murmured. Why would Sir Basil carry this, unless it held some importance? He placed the photo in a protective sleeve. Poirot glanced up as Bennet called attention to the bookshelf. Inspector, the volume of Elizabethan verse, borrowed recently by Miss Hawthorne, as I understand, should be here. Yet it is not. From its empty slot he removed a small, crude paper label bearing the inscription, Collected Sonnets. Only this remains, Poirot noted. I infer that the book was removed deliberately, either by our victim or by another. He tapped the wall beside the shelf. Sounding this surface, I detect no hidden cavity. The book was taken, not secreted. He then noticed a slender bookmark, half protruding, caught between two tomes. Extracting it, he revealed a scrap of hotel stationery with two names, Langley and Hawthorne, scrawled one beneath the other. Beneath them, a time, 10:15 p.m. Poirot held the slip aloft. A meeting arranged, perhaps? Either Sir Basil invited someone, or someone summoned him. Madame Hawthorne, who had accompanied them, stepped forward. He did borrow the book, she admitted softly. For Elise. She admires Elizabethan poets. Her eyes flicked to Elise, who stood pale and silent near the doorway. Poirot turned and regarded Elise with all the courtesy of a gentleman yet with the firmness of an interrogator. Mademoiselle, you said you returned the book. When, precisely? Elise swallowed. The day before yesterday, late afternoon. Poirot nodded, but his eyebrows lifted. Late afternoon, a time unaccounted for, since you were in the garden, I believe. Elise's lips trembled. I was. But I returned it afterwards. I'm certain. And yet, Poirot observed, tapping the bookmark, the meeting time of 10:15 p.m. suggests the book was still in Sir Basil's possession past your scheduled return. Therefore, someone else must have removed it. His gaze swept over the room. Or perhaps you did not return it when you thought. Elise's color drained. She brushed back a strand of hair. I will check. Poirot turned to inspect the gas burner on the ceiling. It, too, bore faint finger marks, smudged oil residues suggesting a hand had been placed upon it. He frowned. Was the gas turned on deliberately to obscure sound? The hiss would mask any raised voices. Inspector Bennet pondered. A cunning idea. Yet the chambermaid said the gas was always low, to preserve the lamp's flame. But here, Poirot said, pointing to the burner cap, someone has tried to unscrew it, then replaced it carelessly. He added quietly, the murderer knew this room well. He then approached the wardrobe. The doors stood slightly ajar, inside, coats and dresses hung undisturbed, but on the rail hung a pair of female slippers, plain, soft leather, with no daisies. Poirot searched the floor beneath the coats and discovered, tucked behind a suit, the matching pair of daisy-patterned slippers. "Found them at last," he murmured. "Washed clean of all dust, someone removed traces before hiding them." Bennet raised his eyebrows. "Slippers that matched the imprint on the ottoman. So our killer concealed them here?" Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And wore another pair, perhaps the plain ones, to leave the room." He tapped his moustaches thoughtfully. "The daisy slippers were instrumental. Yet our killer left no footprints in them, suggesting a fear of leaving evidence." He turned to the chambermaids. "Were these slippers yours?" Both shook their heads. "Not ours, sir." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Someone brought them here intentionally, perhaps in anticipation of the crime." He placed the slippers into a cloth bag. "I shall preserve them as evidence." Inspecting the bedside drawers, he discovered a single glove, left-handed, unpaired, inside the linen drawer. He drew it out and turned it inside out. The lining bore a faint hair, auburn in hue. "A final clue," he said. "This glove belonged to the murderer. Small hands, possibly. And auburn hair belongs to one person here." He did not name her yet. Finally, Poirot returned to the center of the room, closing his eyes as he absorbed the tableau of evidence. The window unused, the door scuff marks, the smudged lamp, the half-burnt note, the missing book, the hidden slippers, and the stray glove with its auburn hair. Each suggested a narrative. He opened his eyes and regarded Inspector Bennet. "We have much to consider. The murderer is among the guests, familiar with Sir Basil's habits, with knowledge of the hotel's workings, and possessed of cunning to stage false clues. But they slipped in their haste, leaving behind these tokens." He tapped the glove again. "The very clues they hoped would elude us will now lead us to the truth." As the chambermaids closed the door at Poirot's instruction and Bennet set to cordon off the room, Poirot lingered a final moment by the ottoman, running his gloved fingers across the tufting. A faint smile touched his lips. "Patience, my friend," he whispered, "patience. The little grey cells have much to do." And with that, he strolled back into the corridor, the collected evidence secure in Bennet's custody, and the master detective's mind already weaving the threads of a perfect deduction. Chapter 4: Psychological Probes and Red Herrings. The drawing room glowed with the late afternoon sun as Poirot invited each guest to recount their actions on the night of Sir Basil's murder. Though the storm had passed, tension pressed heavy upon the velvet upholstery and oil-painted walls. Madame Hawthorn stood by the mantelpiece, her composure steady. Elise hovered near the piano, fingers twisting the carved wood rail. Captain Talbot leaned against a bookcase, arms folded, and Mr. Franklin Hart perched on the edge of a low armchair, notebook open on his knee. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, smoothing his immaculate cravat, "we must examine the mind as carefully as the scene. I shall speak with each of you in turn, asking simple questions. Pray speak freely. Madame Aurelia Hawthorn." First, Poirot turned to the hotel's proprietress. "Madam, you urged me to come with urgency. What prompted your distress?" Madame Hawthorn drew a breath. Sir Basil was more than a guest, he was a friend, and, dare I say, a confidant. I have long feared he knew secrets best left buried. She paused, voice trembling. I did not wish him harm. Only protection. Protection from what, madam? Her eyes clouded. From the consequences of his discoveries. My family's reputation hangs on a thread. Poirot's eyes narrowed. What, precisely, did he intend to reveal? She hesitated, then murmured, something about the Hawthorn estate, financial irregularities long ago covered. A shift passed over Poirot's face. Thank you, madam. Your candor is appreciated. Elise Hawthorne. Next, Poirot politely requested Elise to sit for him. The young woman perched on the settee, her white dress seeming almost luminescent against the dark upholstery. Mademoiselle, you and Sir Basil shared a fondness for poetry. What of your correspondence? Did your acquaintance ever sour? Elise swallowed, glancing at her mother. Sir Basil was generous with praise. But sometimes he criticized my work harshly. She bit her lip. He suggested I lacked originality. And how did that affect you? Her eyes flashed. I was hurt. He was the one I admired above all. She looked away. But I loved him nonetheless. Poirot observed her closely. Love can carry many burdens. Did you ever wish him harmed? Elise recoiled, voice soft but firm. No. I would never harm him. She paused. Yet I confess I envied his talent. Poirot inclined his head. Envy, too, is a powerful emotion. Thank you, mademoiselle. Captain Edward Talbot. Captain Talbot's uniform bore the faint sheen of last night's polish. He answered Poirot's summons with a courteous salute. Captain, you mentioned owing money to Sir Basil. Talbot stiffened. A gentleman's debt, nothing more. He pressed me to repay sooner than I could manage. Did you threaten him? Me? Never. He was aristocratic in every sense. I begged for time. He frowned at Poirot. But I admit the stress was trying. Were you in his suite at 10:15 p.m., as the bookmark suggests? Talbot's jaw clenched. I went there to ask for an extension. He refused. I left before 10. Poirot pressed, is there anyone who can vouch for your whereabouts at that time? Talbot hesitated. No. I was alone on the terrace. That will require verification, Poirot said gently. Mr. Franklin Hart. Finally, Poirot beckoned the American journalist forward. Mr. Hart's eyes glittered with professional curiosity. Mr. Hart, you sought an interview with Sir Basil after dinner. Did he agree? Hart flipped a page in his notebook. He did, at 10 o'clock. He promised me an exclusive. But when I arrived at his door, I found it locked. I waited in the corridor until midnight, then reported him missing. Yet the chambermaid found his body at midnight. Why did you not enter? Hart's lip curled. Too dramatic. I preferred caution. Besides, I needed notes, not witnesses. Poirot leaned in. Your profession values revelation. Did you ever consider that this story might include a murder? Hart's face paled. I confess I did fantasize about a scoop. But I would not kill for it. Red herrings. With each testimony, Poirot noted inconsistencies. Elise's professed jealousy over harsh criticism rang true, yet her tears suggested genuine affection. Captain Talbot's solitary terrace claim was unverifiable, yet his uniform bore no mud or rain. Hart's notebook glowed with ambition, but his alibi faltered on the hours he claimed to wait. And Madame Hawthorne's vague reference to family secrets teased at motives deeper than financial scandal. Poirot tapped his forefinger on his lip. We have emotional entanglements, debts, professional ambition, and familial disgrace. All potent motives, yet none except Madame Hawthorne had both opportunity and means. He let the silence linger before adding, Gentlemen, ladies, you have each provided truth, but perhaps not the whole truth. Unexpected discovery. As Poirot concluded the interviews, the chambermaid who had accompanied him paused outside the drawing room. Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, but I found this behind Sir Basil's desk. She produced a small slip of paper, 2 more lines of verse, written in ink unlike Sir Basil's flowing hand. Trust not the heart that feigns contrite, for shadows hide in broad daylight. Poirot held the fragment thoughtfully. A warning, he murmured. Or perhaps an excuse. He examined the handwriting, muscular, angular, and hurried. This is not the half-burnt apology. Neither Sir Basil nor any of us wrote these words. Inspector Bennet folded his arms. Another false clue, or a genuine confession? Poirot's moustaches quivered in amusement. We cannot say yet. But note how it speaks of deception and betrayal, exactly the themes animating our quartet. The subtle art of observation. Retiring to a corner of the room, Poirot combined the snippets, the smug note of forgive me, the bitter lines of warning, the hidden slippers, the ghostly gas burner. Every detail pointed to one thing, a carefully orchestrated performance intended to mislead. He regarded Madame Hawthorne. Madam, you sought discreet counsel, yet you invited the man who ruined the delicate balance of your world. Why? She sighed, glancing at Elise. Because I hoped he would understand, sympathize with our plight. And you, mademoiselle? Poirot addressed Elise softly. You envy his genius, yet you love him. Such conflict can breed extremes. Elise's hand trembled. I would not harm him, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps not in cold blood. Yet love, jealousy, and ambition can ignite in unexpected ways. He turned to Captain Talbot. You feared financial ruin. Talbot squared his shoulders. He demanded payment, yes. But would he murder for coin? And you, Poirot faced Hart. You sought a story that would define your career. Hart's eyes flickered. True. But I would not kill for it. A trap is set. As evening shadows lengthened, Poirot stood before the hearth. I thank you all for your candor thus far. Tomorrow at noon, I shall reconvene with Inspector Bennet to present my findings. Until then, I implore you to ponder your actions and your feelings. For the culprit among you has not confessed, not yet. He cast a final glance at the group. Their faces, illuminated by the firelight, bore the weight of suspicion. A red thread of uncertainty bound them together, each not a possible motive. Closing the meeting, Poirot murmured to himself, the mind is a labyrinth, and each guest holds a torch. Soon, the path to truth will shine clear. As the others departed, Elise lingered, eyes downcast. Poirot offered her a kindly nod. Courage, mademoiselle, he said softly. All shall be well. She managed a small, grateful smile before hurrying away. Poirot turned his gaze to the dying embers, assured that each puzzle piece had been laid. Now, the masterful deductive weave could begin. The truth, hidden in plain sight, would soon emerge from the shadows. Chapter 5. A second shock. A brittle wind rattled the windows of Hôtel Riviera the following morning, as though nature itself conspired to herald fresh disturbances. Hercule Poirot descended the grand staircase, his sensible shoes clicking on the marble steps. He carried his silver-headed cane in one hand and a slim notebook in the other. The corridors, once hushed with propriety, now thrummed with low conversation and anxious footsteps. At breakfast in the sunlit dining salon, Madame Hawthorne presided in sisterly calm, but her eyes betrayed disquiet. Elise sat beside her, shoulders tense, absently stirring cocoa. Captain Talbot, in full dress uniform despite the hour, ate toast with meticulous care. Mr. Franklin Hart's chair remained conspicuously empty, his place set with an untarnished silver knife and fork. Inspector Bennet stood by a sideboard, examining a telegram with knitted brows. Mon Dieu, murmured Madame Hawthorne as Poirot took his seat. Hart has fled. She nodded at Bennet, who extended the telegram. It read simply, Franklin Hart. Cannot delay. Leaving now. Regret. F.H. Poirot's moustaches twitched. He left no word for me. Bennet shook his head. Nothing beyond this. I have sent men to the station. A chambermaid entered bearing a tray of croissants, her lips quivering. Inspector, sir, she said, I have news. Mr. Hart's car was found abandoned near the Headland Road, 4 miles west of here. There was blood on the scarf he left behind. She laid the crumpled fabric on the sideboard. It was pale silk, and on one corner, a small monogram, A.H. Gasps echoed around the table. Elise's cocoa cup rattled in its saucer. Captain Talbot straightened, uneasy. Madame Hawthorn's breath caught. Poirot rose, silent until all eyes were on him. He lifted the scarf with gloved fingertips and held it to the light. A dark splotch, fresh blood, stained the soft folds. Mon Dieu, he said softly. A personal item of Madame Hawthorn's, and stained with blood. He turned to the proprietor. Madam, when did you last wear this scarf? She paled. Last evening. I left it by the salon piano when I fetched the volume of Elizabethan verses for Elise. And Hart had access to the salon. Anyone did. The door was never locked after dinner. Poirot placed the scarf back on the tray and addressed the company. Monsieur Hart's flight suggests guilt, or fear. But this discovery suggests he may have been attacked, left his scarf in haste, then fled. He paused. Yet it bears your monogram, madam, and thus could implicate you if found at the scene of a crime. Madame Hawthorn's composure cracked. I cannot imagine why Hart would seize my scarf. She looked to Captain Talbot. Perhaps in pursuit. Talbot shook his head. He's no brawler. Elise, pale as a lily, spoke for the first time. Perhaps someone planted it. To shift suspicion from themselves onto you, mother. Poirot nodded. Exactly, mademoiselle. A red herring of the finest quality. Madame Hawthorn lay a gentle hand on her daughter's. My dear, she whispered, but her eyes were distant. Inspector Bennet agreed. We cannot assume Hart was the victim here. He may be the perpetrator, or both. Poirot lifted his cane. I propose we retrace Hart's route. I shall accompany your men to the car's location. Then, and only then, can we know whether foul play is at work. Madame Hawthorn frowned. However will you travel so far? My dear madam, by motor car. Monsieur Poirot is well accustomed to such expeditions. An hour later, Poirot, Bennet, and 2 constables set out in the inspector's motor. A thin mist clung to the high cliffs as they wound along the coastal road, the Atlantic glinting below. The journey took them past gnarled hedgerows, scorched by salt spray, and past the small hamlet of St. Ives Fort, where the postman stood blinking at the sudden arrival of 4 policemen. At the headland bend overlooking the sea, they found Hart's dark green touring car, its bonnet lowered as though in deference to the wind. The engine cover lay on the ground beside it, and the driver's door was open. The road was slick with damp, but there were no skid marks, no sign of collision. The inspector's boot scuffed at a patch of red on the tarmac. Blood, Bennet said quietly, crouching to examine it. Only a few drops, though, no great pool. Poirot stooped and inscribed a neat circle around the drops with a bit of chalk. These drops fall as though from a wound above, not a knee. He retrieved a small magnifying glass from his coat pocket. The flow suggests the bleeding was already slow. The victim, or assailant, stopped here briefly. One constable pointed toward a narrow footpath leading to a rocky inlet. Sir, he said, there are footprints heading down there. Poirot followed the line, a single pair of shoes, damp and muddied, descending the slope. He noted their size, small and slender. Midway down, the prints became indistinct, as though the wearer slipped on loose shale. He examined the soil between the rocks, broken twigs, droppings of gulls, and a fragment of paper, half buried in sand. He picked it up with tweezers and unfolded it, an envelope seal bearing the words Hôtel Riviera and the faintest residue of purple wax. "How curious," Poirot murmured. "Another hotel clue, and not ours." He turned to Bennet. "This handwriting on the seal, does it match the scholars?" "Hearts." Bennet examined it. "No. Too delicate, feminine, almost." Poirot slipped the fragment into an evidence bag. "An invitation or missive, perhaps. Meant for the poet, or intended to lure someone here." He surveyed the inlet, a shallow pool, littered with seaweed and barnacles. "The tide is low, there are no signs of a body ever having been here. Whoever ventured down sought secrecy, not concealment." The inspector frowned. "Should we search further?" Poirot shook his head. "No use. The culprit has long since fled." He stood, brushing dust from his gloves, and gazed along the cliff's edge. "Our American friend may be hiding, or he may be incapacitated. Either way, the evidence thus far is ambiguous." He tapped the scarf in his notebook. "A planted clue, a blood trail leading nowhere, a mysterious seal fragment. These are the machinations of a cunning mind." Back at the hotel, news of Hart's abandoned car spread swiftly. Guests gathered in clusters, exchanging strained theories. Elise hovered near Poirot as he examined the seal fragment under the lamp's glow. "What do you make of it, monsieur?" she asked. "My dear, that seal was affixed to a letter, perhaps an invitation to a clandestine meeting. The color of the wax, too purple for our stationery, suggests another writer." He held her gaze. "Someone sought to frame you, or someone else close by." Elise's breath caught. Then Hart's flight was not from guilt, but flight from danger. "Plausible," Poirot replied. "If he discovered something, or if he was pursued." He closed his eyes. "We have a tangled skein of clues. Yet they all point to one conclusion: our murderer, or perpetrators, are desperate, ready to misdirect and to eliminate those who draw too near." Madame Hawthorne entered, her face grave. "Inspector Bennet reports that Hart has not boarded any train." "Then he remains in the district," Poirot said decisively. "We must search every manor house and fishing cottage until he is found." He straightened, gathering his cane. "Come, Inspector. There is no time to lose." As they hurried away, Elise spoke softly to her mother. "What if he is hiding here, somewhere in the hotel?" Madame Hawthorne forced a reassuring smile. "We shall find him, my dear. Poirot will see to it." Upstairs, the corridors lay silent as the tide rose, the Atlantic clattering against the rocks below. Within the walls of Hôtel Riviera, suspicion now turned inward, and each guest wondered if Franklin Hart's fate would reveal their own guilt, or seal their doom. And in the drawing room, Poirot, alone for a moment, pondered the shrine of clues, the monogrammed scarf, the puddles of blood, the seal fragment, and the footprints leading to the sea. Each hint fed the little grey cells, weaving a narrative that, once uncovered, would expose the mastermind behind Sir Basil's murder, and now the pursuit of Hart. The chasm between innocence and guilt had never felt narrower. Chapter 6: Timelines and Contradictions. Late morning at the Hôtel Riviera found the guests assembled in the sunroom, where windows on 3 sides admitted the radiant Cornish light. Although the storm had lifted, clouds still drifted across the horizon, casting the sea in alternating shades of steel and silver. Poirot stood before a small table upon which he had arranged his notes, the evidence of the past days laid out with his customary precision: the monogrammed scarf, the half-burnt note, the fragment of purple seal, the slippers, the glove with auburn hair, and the bookmark noting 10:15 p.m. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying authority, "it is time we scrutinize the timeline of events. Only by reconciling each element with your accounts can we discern the truth. He produced a sheet of paper and, in neat handwriting, drew a simple table with 3 columns: time, person, activity. He looked up at the guests, Madame Hawthorne, Elise, Captain Talbot, and Mr. Hart, though Hart remained at large, his place marked by an empty chair. "Let us recall the evening of Sir Basil's lecture," Poirot said. Dinner concluded at 8 p.m. At 8:15, Miss Hawthorne, you escorted Sir Basil to his suite to retrieve a borrowed anthology. At 8:30, Captain Talbot and Mr. Hart departed for the terrace. At 9, everyone returned to the drawing room. At 9:45, you each retired to your respective chambers. At midnight, the body was discovered. Poirot tapped the bookmark. "And here, a summons at 10:15. He surveyed the group. "Now, please speak honestly. Do these times align with your recollections?" Elise Hawthorne. Elise, seated nearest the windows, clasped her hands nervously. At 8:15, I did accompany Sir Basil. I went to fetch the book, though I recall returning to the drawing room by precisely 8:25 p.m., for I promised my mother I would join her for tea. Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Tea with your mother at 8:30 p.m. Elise's face flushed. "Yes. We took tea in the salon, just after the storm subsided outside." "And you remained there until 9 p.m. Poirot asked. She hesitated. "Until about 8:45, then I wandered into the garden to gather flowers for breakfast." Poirot made a note. "Garden at 8:45. And you returned by 9 to the drawing room?" Elise nodded. "I believe so." "Captain Edward Talbot?" Poirot turned to Captain Talbot, whose uniform still bore yesterday's rain-damp wrinkles. "Captain, you and Mr. Hart visited the terrace after dinner." Talbot exhaled and straightened. "Indeed. We discussed the repayment of my debt. Sir Basil insisted I settle by midnight. I admit I was anxious." "Anxiety can blur time," Poirot observed. "Did you glance at your watch?" "I did. I recall the conversation stirring until nearly 10 p.m., when I returned indoors. I think I passed Elise in the corridor at about 10:05 p.m. Precisely 10:05. Poirot pressed. Talbot hesitated. "Perhaps a few minutes earlier, or later. I cannot be exact. Yet our bookmark notes 10:15. Who could have written it?" Talbot's eyes flickered to Elise. "I don't know. Mr. Franklin Hart." The empty chair symbolized Franklin Hart's absence, but Inspector Bennet tapped his notebook. Mr. Hart provided a statement before his departure. He said he knocked on Sir Basil's door at 10 p.m. and waited until midnight. Poirot raised a finger. So, according to Hart, he remained in the corridor for 2 hours, unheard and unobserved. And yet the chambermaid heard no tapping, did she? Bennet shook his head. No tapping. She heard only the gas hiss. And the gas was deliberately used to muffle sound, Poirot mused. Which suggests premeditation. The chambermaid's account. Poirot summoned the 2 chambermaids, whose uniforms still bore the faint scent of lavender, into the sunroom. One carried her cap in trembling hands, the other hovered behind with downcast eyes. "Mademoiselle," Poirot addressed the elder, "you attended Sir Basil's suite at 11 to light the lamp." The chambermaid nodded. "Yes, monsieur. The lamp needed trimming. I entered quietly, but the door was unlocked, so I did not announce myself." "Did you hear anything?" Poirot inquired. She closed her eyes. "Only the gas and a soft murmur. I thought it was the wind." "And at midnight, it was you who discovered the body?" She looked away, voice low. "Yes. I screamed, and the inspector arrived soon after. Reconciling the times. Poirot tapped his cane gently on the table. We confront three diverging accounts: Elise's tea and garden stroll, Talbot's terrace meeting, and Hart's corridor wait. All claim presence at or near the poet's suite between 8:30 and midnight. Yet only one, or none, can be accurate in full. He turned to Madame Hawthorne. Madam, did you observe Elise in the garden at 8:45 p.m.? Madame Hawthorne frowned. I saw her early in the evening, but I did not note the time precisely. Cannot you recall whether she returned before or after 9? Poirot asked. My memory fails me, she admitted. Poirot wrote garden? 8.45 beside Elise's name and underlined the doubt. He next addressed Captain Talbot. You saw Elise at 10:05 p.m. Talbot shifted. Yes, though it could have been 10.15. Poirot arched an eyebrow. And you yourself returned at 10 p.m. but waited until 10.15 to check on Sir Basil. Talbot's jaw tightened. Something like that. Poirot's eyes gleamed. So both your times are approximate. Yet the bookmark, 10.15, indicates a precise meeting. Who might have written it? Talbot and Elise exchanged uneasy glances, neither willing to speak. Investigating the bookmark. Poirot held up the bookmark with white-gloved fingers. Observe the script, firm, even strokes, no trembling. The letter 1 is written with a small serif, unlike Elise's simple strokes. The 0 is a perfect circle, unlike Talbot's oval. The colon is spaced exactly in the middle, suggesting an educated hand accustomed to precision. He swept his gaze across the group. Madame Hawthorne's handwriting, perhaps. Madame Hawthorne shook her head. My hand is far more looping. Mr. Hart's. Inspector Bennet asked. Poirot smiled slightly. Hart's writing tilts to the right, whereas this is upright. I believe the bookmark was penned by Sir Basil himself. Madame Hawthorne started. But why? He would never summon someone at 10.15. Unless he wished to reveal something at that precise moment when he expected someone to arrive. He laid the bookmark down. Now, consider the anthology, removed at 8.15 and replaced, according to Miss Hawthorne, by 8.25. Yet Sir Basil still had it at 10.15, so someone borrowed it again. Who? Elise's eyes filled with tears. I did not. Captain Talbot cleared his throat. Hardly me. Bennet frowned. Hart had the book in his car when we found him. So he must have pocketed it. Poirot nodded. Indeed. Hart may have borrowed it to examine annotations, possibly to uncover a clue. But why, if he left no note? He expected to return. The missing minutes. Poirot's gaze sharpened. We have a gap between 10.15 and midnight. The chambermaid heard only gas. The murderer used the gas to mask sounds. So at some point, perhaps at 10.15, the killer extinguished the lamp, turned on the gas, struck Sir Basil, and fled. During that interval, someone wrote the bookmark, Sir Basil himself, perhaps anticipating this meeting. He turned to Madame Hawthorne. Your family's secret, financial irregularities dating back a generation. Sir Basil had learned of this, as you confessed. He arranged to meet you at 10.15, perhaps to demand restitution, or to threaten exposure. Madame Hawthorne's face drained of colour. He did. He did send me a note, handwritten, saying he would meet me, at 10.15, in his suite. Poirot stepped forward. Madam, where is this note? She bit her lip. I burned it, in the grate, after you arrived. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Burnt, yes, but the bookmark remained. Sir Basil pressed a small scrap into the book for memory. You destroyed the rest. Madame Hawthorn sank into a chair. I was terrified. A contradiction revealed. Poirot turned to Elise. And you, did you know of this meeting? Elise drew a shuddering breath. He asked me to join him at 10:15 to discuss my poetry. A chorus of surprise arose. Madame Hawthorn protested. He wrote to me. Elise shook her head. I found a torn sheet. Elise, forgive my harsh words, meet me at 10:15 to reconcile. Poirot's eyes shone. So 2 summonses, one to Madame Hawthorn, one to Elise. Each torn and destroyed by terror or shame. And both meant to lure them separately. He looked at Captain Talbot. But you found no note. Talbot shook his head. No note. Therefore, Poirot concluded, the killer forged Madame Hawthorn's and Elise's summonses to sow confusion. They wrote the bookmark to rival Sir Basil's note, then replaced the original, anticipating that the parties would destroy their own summonses. The guests exchanged bewildered glances. Sir Basil's plan, to confront Madame Hawthorn and Elise, was subverted by a cunning mind that staged 2 meetings, forcing an alibi breakdown. Closing the gap. Poirot resumed his seat. We have uncovered contradictions in your accounts, but the key lies between 10:15 and midnight. The murderer visited Sir Basil's room twice, first, at 10:15, writing misleading notes and placing the bookmark, second, at a later time, striking him down under the cover of gas. He fixed Talbot with a steady stare. Captain, your claim of walking the terrace until 10 p.m., then passing Elise at 10:05, contradicts Elise's account of being in the garden at that time. Talbot's face reddened. I passed someone on the stairs. I assumed it was Elise. It may have been another. Who else could have been there? Poirot inquired. Talbot swallowed. I do not know. Poirot turned to Elise. You said you were alone in the garden. Elise's eyes dropped. I may have returned inside and forgotten. Monsieur Bennet interjected, we need precise alibis. Poirot stood. Indeed. We shall revisit the scene at nightfall. But now, I have laid bare the contradictions. The murderer hoped these contradictions would conceal the truth. Instead, through methodical comparison, we see the pattern, multiple summons, destroyed notes, false sightings, and a manipulated timeline. He folded his hands. Soon, the culprit will find that threads of deceit unravel under the bright light of reason. The guests sat in stunned silence as Poirot gathered his table of evidence. Outside, the sun broke free from cloud, illuminating the sea in a blaze of silver, a promise that, even after confusion and betrayal, clarity would prevail. Chapter 7: Gathering of the Suspects. Late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Hôtel Riviera's drawing room, gilding the gilded frames and illuminating the motes of dust that danced in the gentle breeze. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stood by the wide fireplace, his posture faultlessly erect, moustaches waxed to perfection. Before him, seated in solemn array, were Madame Hawthorn, her daughter Elise, Captain Talbot, and, with one chair conspicuously empty, the memory of Mr. Franklin Hart. Poirot surveyed the group with serene intensity. Miss Amos, he began, we have shared confidences, examined the scene, traversed the cliffs, and scrutinized timelines. Tonight, I ask you to listen as I recount what we know, and what remains concealed. He extended a gloved hand toward a small table, upon which each physical clue lay in quiet dignity, the half-burnt apology note, the second unsigned warning, the bookmark marked 10:15, the monogrammed silk scarf, the fragment of purple seal, the pair of hidden slippers, and the single left glove with auburn hair. A hush fell as Poirot lifted the first exhibit. This, the half-burnt note bearing the words "Forgive me," was found by the window. Its torn appearance suggested haste and contrition. Yet the signature is absent, indicating it was meant to mislead. He set it down and picked up the second scrap. In the corridor, we discovered these lines. "Trust not the heart that feigns contrite. For shadows hide in broad daylight." Another attempt to steer suspicion away from the true path. He laid both fragments side by side. 2 notes, 1 message, confusion. Only a suspect hoping to obscure motive would employ such artifice. Next came the bookmark. Poirot held it aloft. Here, Sir Basil himself wrote 10:15 p.m., the time at which he intended to meet, once with Madame Hawthorn regarding family affairs, and again with Mademoiselle Elise to discuss poetry. Yet the scrap you destroyed in fear prevented you from realizing that Sir Basil's own note was replaced by a forged duplicate. He turned to Madame Hawthorn. "Madam, you burned your summons in the grate. Mademoiselle, you tore yours in 2. Both acts facilitated the murderer's plan." Madame Hawthorn bowed her head. Elise's hands trembled in her lap. Poirot replaced the bookmark and reached for the monogrammed scarf. "This silk, bearing your initials, Madam, was found abandoned at the headland, which suggested Mr. Hart fled in fear or concealment. Its bloodstain, small but fresh, indicates violence nearby. Yet no wound was found on Mr. Hart's body, he remains missing, so perhaps the scarf was planted to frame you." He handed it back, then turned to the fragment of seal. "A letter once sealed with purple wax, foreign to our hotel stationery, was discovered by the sea. The seal bears Hôtel Riviera's name, although the wax is none of ours. Who sought to lure Sir Basil to the cliffs under false pretense?" He paused, eyes roaming the faces before him. "A clever ruse, summon Sir Basil out of his suite, away from witnesses, then strike him in solitude." The guest shifted uneasily. Captain Talbot cleared his throat, Elise drew a shaky breath, Madame Hawthorn's fingers drummed on her knee. Poirot signalled Inspector Bennet to produce the slippers and glove. "And here, we have 2 more items, a pair of slippers, hidden behind Sir Basil's wardrobe, bearing the imprint of daisies, and a single left glove, whose lining yielded a strand of auburn hair. The ottoman by the window showed the impression of the daisy sole, our murderer first sat there. Yet no footprints led in or out in those slippers, meaning they were donned after the act. Why hide them? Because they would betray the wearer's identity." He laid the glove upon the table. This glove belonged to the left hand only. By examining it, we see that the murderer sought to avoid leaving prints, but one hair remained, and auburn hair is not common among the staff. His gaze settled on Elise. "Mademoiselle, you have auburn hair." A delicate colour rose in Elise's cheeks. "Madam," Poirot addressed the proprietor, "you might also recall your daughter's fascination with Elizabethan verse. She borrowed an anthology, which Sir Basil later used to conceal the apology note. That very book vanished and was recovered from Mr. Hart's car, suggesting he, too, was drawn into the web of verses and secrets." Inspector Bennet interjected quietly, "Gentlemen and ladies, the sequences do not align. Who wrote the forged summonses? Who tampered with the gas to muffle sounds? Who wiped the lamp globe? Who brought the purple-sealed letter? Who planted the monogrammed scarf? And who wore the daisy-patterned slippers to crouch by Sir Basil's side before delivering the fatal blow?" Poirot raised a gloved hand for silence. There remain 4 motives: Madame Hawthorn's desire to protect her family's reputation, Elise's envy and affection for the poet, Captain Talbot's fear of financial ruin, and Mr. Hart's professional ambition. Each has opportunity, each has motive. Yet only one among you combined them with sufficient cunning. He stepped back and folded his hands. "I shall now ask you to reflect upon the following contradictions. the timestamps of each alibi vague and overlapping. The destroyed summonses precisely tailored to deceive. The pattern of the evidence placed to divert us. The fingerprint-free gloves and hidden slippers designed to mislead forensic inquiry. Poirot looked from Madame Hawthorne to Elise, then to Captain Talbot. Tomorrow at midday, I shall reveal how these pieces fit together. Until then, I advise each of you to contemplate your actions and your feelings from the evening in question. For the murderer among you believes they have eliminated all traces. But the genius of detection lies in the spaces between misdirection. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Outside, a solitary gull cried across the salt-drenched air. Inside, each heart beat a little faster, each mind turned inward with a growing dread. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, knitting together the final strands of his masterful denouement. Good evening, he concluded. Rest well, for soon the truth will be unveiled. The guests filed from the room in solemn order, leaving Poirot alone by the fire. He stroked his moustaches thoughtfully and murmured to himself, "Patience, patience. The murderer's confidence will be their undoing." And with that, the drawing-room door closed behind him, sealing in the suspense that would carry them into the final act. Chapter 8: The Masterful Denouement. Late morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Hôtel Riviera drawing-room, gilding the Turkish rug and casting long shadows across the assembled company. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in his charcoal morning suit, stood before the fire, his grey eyes bright with anticipation. Inspector Bennet sat to one side, notebook closed, while Madame Hawthorne, Elise, and Captain Talbot occupied the chairs opposite, their expressions taut with apprehension. The final moment had come. "Miss Amiss," Poirot began, his voice calm yet resonant, "we have traversed a path of tangled evidence, half-burnt notes, false summonses, misplaced slippers, and a monogrammed scarf. Each clue was designed to mislead, each alibi crafted to conceal. Today, I shall reveal how these fragments converge into a singular truth." He motioned to the table where the evidence lay. "First, consider the apology note found by Sir Basil's window, bearing the words, 'Forgive me.' It was torn, unsigned, and hastily burnt by Madame Hawthorne. Yet its ragged edge matched precisely the scrap Elise discovered and destroyed after your interview, mademoiselle. Both you and your mother believed these was your own note, written in your hand, bearing your sentiments. In truth, neither of you penned it." Elise's breath caught as Poirot lifted the second scrap, the warning lines. "Trust not the heart that feigns contrite, for shadows hide in broad daylight." These lines, he continued, were composed not by Sir Basil, nor by any of our guests save one. They were written in a hurried hand, one matching your personal diary entries, Elise, as subsequent analysis of ink and pen bore out. They were meant to implicate suspicion of betrayal, to suggest that Sir Basil had enemies beyond our circle. He paused, surveying the faces before him. Next, the bookmark inscribed to 10:15 p.m. Sir Basil himself wrote this, in precise, upright strokes. It marked his intended meeting with Madame Hawthorne, confronting her over her family's financial secrets, and with Elise, to reconcile after his criticism of her verse. Both summonses were genuine. You, Madam, burnt yours in panic, you, Elise, ripped yours in shame. This left the forged duplicates to govern the timeline, placing alibis in conflict. Poirot lifted the monogrammed silk scarf. Madame Hawthorne's scarf was found bloodstained near the headland road. Inspector Bennet and I discovered minimal bleeding there, indicating a fleeting scrape. Yet Madame Hawthorne was never at that spot. She left her scarf in the salon, where someone retrieved it deliberately to shift suspicion. The true victim at the headland was Mr. Franklin Hart, who encountered the murderer in both fury and fear. At the mention of Hart, Captain Talbot's posture stiffened. Elise's eyes flickered toward the absent journalist's chair. Poirot continued without pause. Mr. Hart had uncovered Elise's secret, that the unpublished verses she attributed to her own composition were, in fact, lines she had taken from Sir Basil's private notebooks, lines he had left in the anthology for her alone. He intended to confront her. In his haste to retrieve the book, evidenced by its discovery in his motor, he realized too late the danger. Fearing exposure, Elise followed him to the cliffs, sought to seize the stolen manuscript, and in the struggle your scarf was torn from Hart's coat, stained with his blood from a graze as he fell against the car door. Madame Hawthorne gasped, glancing at the scarf. He was hurt, she whispered. Only superficially, Poirot assured her. Hart escaped further injury by flight, but not before Elise planted the scarf and retraced her path, leaving faint footprints and discarded the daisy-patterned slippers behind Sir Basil's wardrobe. She then donned them to crouch by his ottoman, placing the slipper imprint, and to write misleading notes by lamplight, extinguishing the lamp to muffle sound with the gas. Elise's eyes widened. No, it wasn't meant to go that far. What went far, Poirot said softly, was your fear of disgrace. After confronting Hart, you returned to Sir Basil's suite, discovering only the flickering gas and the half-finished apology he had composed for you. Seizing the moment, you crept behind him as he confided to himself, impetuously drove the letter opener into his heart, then erased your glove prints by discarding your left glove, whose lining retained a single auburn hair, into the wardrobe. Elise's knees trembled. She pressed her hand against her lips. I panicked, she stammered. I only meant to scare him into silence. Poirot inclined his head. Your panic betrayed you, mademoiselle. For in seeking to conceal one transgression, plagiarism, you committed two far graver ones. The half-burnt note was your craft, the false warning slip your device, the slippers staged, the bookmark duplicated, and the gas strategy artifice to mask the act. He looked across to Captain Talbot. You, Captain, believed you encountered Elise in the corridor at 10:05 p.m., but it was the chambermaid retrieving the lamp. Your solitary stance on the terrace remains unchallenged. And Madame Hawthorne, your family's history indeed weighed upon you, but you never bore the means or the motive to kill. Madame Hawthorne rose, her face pale but unbowed. My poor child, she murmured, tears in her eyes. Poirot turned back to Elise. I regret, mademoiselle, that you forced my hand. Your ingenuity nearly succeeded. Yet the smallest details, one hair, one scrap of seal wax, one careful footprint, betrayed the grand design. He sighed. It is a pity, for beneath your talent lay genuine affection for Sir Basil. But love, when poisoned by fear, can become its own undoing. Inspector Bennet stepped forward and gently took Elise's arm. Mademoiselle, I must place you under arrest for the murders of Sir Basil Langley and the assault upon Mr. Franklin Hart. Elise offered no resistance. She lowered her gaze, sobs trembling in her throat. I am so sorry, she whispered. Madame Hawthorne rushed to her daughter's side. Elise, forgive me for pushing you so hard, she sobbed, gathering her into an embrace even as Bennet gently guided them apart. Captain Talbot, pale but steady, removed his cap. May justice be served. Poirot let the moment settle, then addressed the room. Let this be a lesson, that the most intricate masquerade cannot conceal the truth from the watchful eye of reason. Each of you contributed pieces to this puzzle, wittingly or not, but it was the determination of the little grey cells that triumphed. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Now, I shall see to the comfort of Madame Hawthorne and the arrangements for the American's return, while Inspector Bennet transports Mademoiselle Elise to the appropriate authorities. Let us hope that, in time, her remorse may find a measure of redemption. As the guests dispersed in solemn procession, Madame Hawthorne weeping softly, Captain Talbot composing himself, Bennet preparing to depart, Poirot lingered by the hearth. He smoothed his cravat and patted his moustaches, content that justice was served. Outside, the The Atlantic roared against the cliffs, its ceaseless rhythms unaffected by human frailties. Monsieur Hercule Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The case of the Hôtel Riviera was at an end, a tapestry of deception unraveled by the finest of detectives, whose method and humanity had once more prevailed. And in the warm corridors of the seaside retreat, peace, though bruised, could at last return.